Hello. Today we're going to look at Chapter 14, the United States in World War II, Section 4, the Homefront. And we start here by taking a look at the role of women in the workforce. As we looked at in a previous chapter, women in large numbers entered the workforce during World War II, as they had in World War I. And many women worked in the factories, turning out the ships and planes and tanks and ammunition that were necessary for the war effort. And economic power increased for women, but also the divorce rate increased. Now looking at sacrifices and struggle for Americans at home. Conserving food and other goods. Americans planted victory gardens as a way to conserve food. So the concept of the victory garden is and this was something that was done during World War I as well, rather than rely upon store-bought food to decrease the demand, many people planted their own gardens so they could grow their own food and thus reduce the demand for farm-produced food, which could then be exported to feed our troops. The United States began rationing food items such as coffee, butter, sugar, and meat. Metal, glass, rubber, and gasoline were scarce goods. Americans held scrap drives to collect waste materials that might be used in the war effort. Investing in victory. Americans bought millions of dollars of war bonds. Over half of the population did their civic duty and bought war bonds. Paying the personal price. Families dealt with the absence of loved ones by displaying a flag and a blue star. Americans read news accounts of the war with great interest, such as Ernie Pyle, who was a newspaper journalist. American support for the war. Roosevelt called on the nation to protect the four freedoms in his Four Freedoms speech. Once again, those four freedoms were the freedom of speech, the freedom of worship, the freedom from want, and the freedom from fear. The Office of War Information spread propaganda or information and ideas designed to promote a cause. Examples included posters encouraging people to join the armed forces or to save gasoline. The OWI also warned the public about the dangers that they faced. Hollywood made a series of patriotic films that featured soldiers and workers on the home front. Sometimes the drive to influence the public attitudes led to conflict. For example, the Barnett ruling argued that Americans also faced restrictions. Many young people from the camps joined the armed forces to prove their loyalty. Not all Japanese Americans accepted their internment peacefully, and some mounted legal challenges, such as was the case in Korematsu versus the United States, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And the photograph right here is a photograph of the Civilian Center, or Civilian Assembly Center, in Turlock, California, and this was located currently where the Turlock County Fairgrounds currently sit, and at that point in time it was used for the internment of Japanese Americans in World War II. And here we have a look at the case of Korematsu versus the United States, 1944. The Supreme Court tried to find the right balance between the rights of Japanese Americans and wartime needs. Fred Korematsu refused the executive order that relocated 110,000 Japanese Americans to internment camps. Korematsu was born in Oakland, California, and was an American citizen. He was arrested and then appealed his case to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled against Korematsu, stating that the relocation order was justified as a temporary wartime measure. He continued to work for civil rights and had his conviction overturned in 1983. New roles for the federal government. The Office of Price Administration, or OPA, placed limits on the prices that businesses could charge for products and materials. The War Production Board made sure that the military got the products and resources that it needed. The WPB placed limits on clothing manufacturers. The WPB placed restrictions on clothing. For example, jackets were only allowed to be a certain length. Government spending during the war rose sharply. Most of the money went to the armed forces. The government increased income tax rates to help pay for the war, and millions paid income tax for the very first time. And here we look at the OPA, the Office of Private